Welcome to Creepy Corner Stories, where the shadows whisper and the ordinary turns terrifying. Tonight, we step into the one place you thought was safe, your own backyard. But what if I told you that beyond the picket fences and under the soft glow of porch lights, there are secrets buried deep in the soil? Stories of things that lurk just out of sight, of whispers in the wind that don't belong to the living, and of people who stepped outside, never to be seen again. So let's begin with the horror. Story: The Thing in the Backyard. A man named Daniel had just moved into a house in a quiet neighborhood. The backyard was large, surrounded by a dense tree line. It felt private, almost too private. One night, while taking out the trash, he noticed something strange. In the far corner of his yard, near the trees, the grass looked disturbed, as if something had been digging. Thinking it might be an animal, he ignored it. The next morning, the spot was even worse, like something had been clawing at the dirt all night. But what disturbed him most was the deep, human-like handprint in the soil. Over the next few nights, strange things kept happening. His motion-activated lights flickered on, but when he checked, nothing was there. One night, he heard a scraping sound at his back door. When he looked outside, he saw nothing, but the dirt in the backyard had been dug deeper. Finally, he set up a security camera. The footage from that night horrified him. Around 2:57 a.m., something crawled out from the trees. It was humanoid but impossibly thin, its limbs too long, moving in unnatural jerky motions. It stopped at the hole it had been digging, reached in, and pulled something out, a bundle wrapped in old cloth. It turned its head toward the camera, its face obscured in shadow, and then it scuttled back into the trees. Daniel called the police, who came the next morning. When they dug up the area, they uncovered a shallow grave with old decayed remains. The coroner later determined they belonged to a child who had gone missing decades earlier. The strangest part, after the remains were taken away, nothing strange ever happened in the backyard again. Story: The Backyard Watcher. A woman named Lisa moved into a small house in a rural area, excited to have a big backyard for her kids to play in. It was peaceful, with a line of thick trees marking the property. But from the very first night, something felt wrong. Lisa would catch glimpses of movement near the trees, just at the edge of her vision. At first, she thought it was deer or maybe a neighbor passing through. But every time she looked directly at the spot, there was nothing there. One night, as she sat on her back porch, she saw it clearly. A tall, shadowy figure standing completely still at the tree line. It didn't move, it didn't make a sound, but Lisa felt its eyes on her. She rushed inside and locked the doors. For the next few weeks, the figure appeared every night, always standing at the same spot, always watching. She started keeping the curtains closed, but she could feel it out there. Then came the worst night. Lisa woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of something tapping on her bedroom window. Her heart pounded as she slowly turned to look. There, pressed against the glass, was a pale, rotting face. Its eyes were black pits, its mouth twisted into a wide, unnatural grin. She screamed, and in an instant, it was gone. The next morning, she found footprints in the dirt outside her window. They led back to the trees, back to the exact spot where the figure always stood. That was the last night Lisa stayed in that house. She packed up her kids and left, never looking back. The house remains empty to this day. But locals say, if you go there at night, you'll still see the figure standing at the tree line, watching. Story: The Buried Doll. Jake and his wife Emily had just bought a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The backyard was spacious, perfect for their 2-year-old daughter, Lily, to play in. One afternoon, while digging up an area to plant a small garden, Jake's shovel hit something solid. Curious, he dug deeper and pulled out a small, old wooden box. Inside was a porcelain doll. It was filthy, its dress yellowed with age, but what unsettled him most were its eyes, glossy black beads that seemed to stare right through him. Lily immediately took a liking to it. "Mine," she said, clutching the doll tight. That night, strange things began happening. Emily woke up to the sound of whispering through the baby monitor. At first, she thought Lily was talking in her sleep until she heard another voice. a soft, rasping whisper. She rushed to Lily's room, but the toddler was sound asleep, the doll resting beside her. Over the next few nights, the whispers continued. Objects in the house moved on their own. Lily began having nightmares and talking about a sad girl who visited her at night. Then, one evening, Emily found Lily sitting on the floor, rocking the doll and singing an eerie lullaby, one they had never taught her. The final straw came when Lily woke up screaming, clawing at her own arms. Red scratches lined her skin, as if tiny hands had grabbed her. Terrified, Jake grabbed the doll and took it back outside. He dug a deep hole and buried it far away from the house. From that night on, the house was quiet. No more whispers, no more nightmares. But sometimes when Jake stood in the backyard, he swore he could hear faint giggling beneath the soil. Story: The Thing Under the Deck. Mark had always loved sitting on his back porch at night, enjoying the cool breeze. His house backed up to a dense forest, and the only sound was the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustling of leaves. One summer night, as he was about to head inside, he heard a noise from beneath the deck. A slow, scraping sound, like something dragging itself across the wood. Figuring it was a raccoon or stray cat, he grabbed a flashlight and crouched down to look. His stomach dropped. Two pale hands, thin, bony, and too long, were gripping the wooden beams. Slowly, a face emerged from the darkness. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its skin was stretched tight over its skull, its eyes too large, too black, and it was smiling. Mark stumbled backward, slamming the porch door shut behind him. The thing didn't move. It just stared at him through the slats of the deck, its fingers twitching. For the next few nights, he heard it moving under there, scraping, whispering. Sometimes he would wake up to faint tapping at his bedroom window, even though he lived on the second floor. One night, after weeks of torment, he decided to check again, this time with his phone to record whatever was under there. He turned on the camera, reached his arm under the deck, and took a photo. What he saw still haunts him. The thing was crouched close, its face mere inches from his hand. But this time, it wasn't smiling. Its mouth was open wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Mark didn't sleep that night. The next day, he hired a contractor to seal off the entire deck with concrete. Since then, the noises stopped. But sometimes late at night, he swears he still hears scratching deep beneath the foundation. Story: The Backyard Swing. When Olivia and her husband moved into their new home, she immediately loved the backyard. It was wide and open, with an old oak tree in the corner. Hanging from one of its thick branches was a single wooden swing. It looked old but sturdy. Their 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, was thrilled. "Can I play on it?" she asked. Olivia hesitated. Something about the swing made her uneasy. The rope looked new, too new for how old the wood was, but she couldn't explain why it felt wrong. That night, as she was locking up, she glanced outside. The swing was moving, not swaying gently, but swinging back and forth, as if someone was on it. But no one was there. From that night on, strange things started happening. Sophie would giggle and talk to someone outside, even when she was alone. When Olivia asked who she was talking to, Sophie smiled and said, "The girl on the swing." One evening, Olivia watched from the kitchen window as Sophie played outside. She saw her daughter run to the swing and stop suddenly, as if someone had whispered in her ear. Then Sophie turned, walked back inside, and said something that sent chills down Olivia's spine. She said, "She doesn't want you here." That night, Olivia's husband decided to take the swing down. He grabbed a knife and started cutting the rope. But as soon as the first strand snapped, Sophie let out a blood-curdling scream from inside the house. They rushed to her room and found her in bed, eyes wide, shaking. She whispered, "She's mad." The next morning, the swing was gone. Not cut, not broken, just gone. The rope, the wood, everything. Sophie never spoke about the girl again. But sometimes late at night, Olivia swears she hears the faint sound of creaking wood, like a swing moving back and forth in the wind. Story: The Backyard Well. Daniel and his wife Sarah bought an old farmhouse with a huge backyard. At the far end of the property stood an old stone well, covered with a heavy wooden lid. The real estate agent mentioned it had been sealed up decades ago, but Daniel always felt uneasy around it. One evening, while grilling outside, he heard something strange. Whispers. Faint, echoing whispers coming from the direction of the well. Thinking it was the wind, he ignored it. But later that night, he heard it again, only this time it was closer. The next day, curiosity got the best of him. He went to the well, pried off the wooden lid, and shined a flashlight inside. The light barely penetrated the darkness, but deep down he saw something. A handprint. A wet, muddy handprint inside the well, smeared against the stone wall. He staggered back, slamming the lid shut. That night, Sarah woke up to the sound of footsteps outside their window. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and looked outside, but there was no one there. Just the well, its lid slightly ajar. The next day, they had a contractor fill the well with concrete. That should have been the end of it. But that night, as they lay in bed, they heard a sound that made their blood run cold. A slow, deliberate knock at their bedroom window. They never opened the curtains. And by morning, the knocks had stopped. But in the backyard, leading away from the sealed well, were muddy footprints, disappearing into the trees. Story: The Backyard Grave. When Alex moved into his new house, the backyard was his favorite part, big, peaceful, and surrounded by woods. But there was one odd thing, a small, unmarked stone near the tree line. It was half buried in the dirt, almost like a forgotten headstone. His neighbor, an old man named Mr. Calloway, warned him about it. "Don't move that stone," he said. "Leave it be." Alex laughed it off. He wasn't superstitious. One weekend, while landscaping, he decided to dig it up and move it. It was heavy, but after some effort, he pulled it free. Underneath was a deep, dark hole, nothing inside, just empty soil. That night, strange things started happening. Alex woke up to the sound of shuffling footsteps outside his bedroom window. He peered out, but no one was there. The backyard felt wrong, like something was watching. The next morning, he found muddy footprints in the grass, leading from the hole where the stone had been. Each night, the footsteps got closer. The motion lights flickered on, revealing only empty space. One night, Alex woke up unable to move. A heavy weight pressed on his chest, and he felt hot, rotting breath near his ear. A low voice whispered, "Put it back." Terrified, he ran outside, grabbed the stone, and shoved it back into place. He packed dirt around it, whispering apologies. From that night on, the noises stopped. But sometimes late at night, he swears he hears a faint, satisfied sigh coming from the backyard. They say your backyard is supposed to be a place of comfort, a place to relax, to let your guard down. But sometimes the things lurking just beyond the tree line, the things hiding beneath the ground, don't want to be forgotten. Maybe it's an old swing that still moves on its own, a whisper coming from a well that should be empty, or footprints that lead to nowhere. Maybe, just maybe, your backyard isn't as empty as you think. So next time you step outside at night, pay attention, listen closely, because some things never really leave. And if you ever hear something scratching at your window, you might want to close the curtains. Thanks for watching Creepy Corner Stories. Stay safe and stay out of the backyard.